I'm John Michelson with Michelson and Associates. We have an elder law firm here in Nevada.
My name is J.P. Rahman. I'm with the Clark County District Attorney's Office over the Elder Abuse Unit and the Major Fraud Unit.
My name is Linda Falk. I'm a professional guardian here in Las Vegas, and my company is Senior Solutions Group.
Thank you all for coming. My name is Karen Bush, and I'm with Home Watch Caregivers as outreach coordinator and Senior Solutions Group as a care coordinator. And I want to thank our panel so much for doing this. This is obviously a rampant problem, and we want to try to educate people as much as we can. So I'm hoping we can hold more and more of these panels. I want to thank everyone for coming. I want to thank Legacy House, Nancy Overson, who's the executive director, and Melody Mojica. It's an assisted living and memory care, brand new, up in Centennial Hills. They are the ones that provided lunch, so thank you so much. So we only have an hour, so we're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you.
All right, so this is not a fun topic. I'm sure you, but I'm glad you're all here and are interested in it. I'm going to start with basic elder abuse. And I think we all know this: physical abuse, emotional abuse, sexual abuse, neglect, financial abuse, and healthcare fraud. Those are the basics that's kind of universal among everybody dealing with elder abuse. So physical abuse, I think, is quite explanatory. It's kind of got what everybody has. You look for bruising. You look for, one of the things they have on there is tape marks on the arms or legs. I've actually seen this because, people didn't want them getting out of bed, didn't want them getting out at night, wandering around, so they tape them down or tie them down. This is, of course, not acceptable, so we don't do that. Broken glasses. A big one is report of drug abuse. Now, this I've seen many times. You have a daughter, granddaughter, neighbor who is addicted to drugs. You can go into a home, you'll find a lot of empty pill bottles from different doctors. The drug abuser is obviously taking mom or grandma to different doctors, getting prescriptions for their addiction, and using them, and poor elder person is not getting any pain medicine. So watch for that. If you see a prescription dug for any opiate that is from more than one doctor, something is wrong. And if it's being refilled constantly, something is wrong. I mean, you just know that something's wrong, so you go. That's one of the big ones that I have seen several times. I don't see, actually, in my field, a lot of physical abuse with bruising and that sort of thing. People, if they know I'm going to be involved, are going to be careful, so they don't do that. But they can't get rid of the drugs. All right, let me go to a picture. This is Millie. I don't know if you can see her well. I had seen her about 3 weeks before this picture was taken. She was in the care of her son. He was a co-guardian with a daughter in another state. At that time, you needed to have a guardian in the state of Nevada. 3 weeks ago, she was vibrant, happy, didn't look like there was any abuse going on at all. She was doing well. However, her son was stealing her money. So that's why I was asked to come in by the family to, work out. Well, in order to get a guardianship, it's not a fast process, it's a slow process, is which it should be. But by the time I got there 3 weeks later, this is what I found. I don't think Millie had been out of that bed for weeks. And I don't know if she had been fed at all in that time. And really what happened was the son realized that he was going to lose control, and he was kind of mentally breaking down. And that does happen. So you have to be careful there was no signs of this that was going to happen. He was a little aggressive with me, but he was taking good care of his mom. So you have to kind of watch for those things, what triggers people to break down in their caregiving and not do a good job. I ended up having to call Metro, first of all, to get in the house. I think there were, at the end, you see a couple patrol cars. I think there were 5 patrol cars, an ambulance, and a fire truck at the house to get her out of the house, because he would not let us in the house to get her out. And she ended up spending a couple weeks in the hospital, but she did recover nicely. So there's good news there. Emotional abuse is something a little bit harder to see. You don't see it as well. You have to kind of be intuitive with it. But if you go visit your granny and, you know, there's somebody taking care of them and they seem to be a little afraid, if they're deteriorating mentally quicker than you thought they should, if they're mumbling things to you and you can't understand it, but they're still mumbling. And then they also say they kind of get the dementia look where they're rocking back and forth and stuff. That's signs of mental abuse. Also, not allowing people to see the person. This we see frequently where, oh, you know, mom can't come to the phone right now because she's in the bathroom or she's sleeping. You can't come over today because she's having a bad day. When you start seeing that stuff, those are red flags and you need to say, something's wrong, I'm going in that house now, okay? And if you end up having to force your way in, it's better than to let this person suffer. So that's something you really need to be on the lookout for. It can be very subtle, but it's there. And the person, the elderly person, the abused person, it can be definitely hurt by this. I mean, it's one thing mentally, but that kind of thing can really hurt their physical being too, because they're pretty fragile at that point in time. So, you know, watch for that, and you do see it. Not so unlike spousal abuse, you can see the same thing, where you isolate a person on it. Sexual abuse. That's something I don't encounter very often. I do see it kind of the other way. Some of our clients with dementia or Alzheimer's kind of lose their ability to impulse control. And a lot of them enjoy sex. And I think you see it in assisted livings, maybe in neighborhoods where, you know, you have one man or woman who's a little bit assertive and wants to get together, but it's not like the other person is against it. So, you know, you can't say that it's sexual abuse, but it is something you need to watch for, because not that you're going to get complaints from the two involved, but family members sometimes can get a little irate about this sort of thing. So just be careful, that's all I've got to say. I know there's sexual abuse out there, I just don't encounter it. The only thing you do find is an older man, and all of a sudden there's a woman like half his age that shows up frequently. I had one guy that met his abuser at the mailbox. Now, she didn't live in that neighborhood. I'm sure she targeted him. And, you know, and sex was a big part of it. And she got quite a bit of money out of him, there's no doubt. And it took a lot for us to get her out of the picture. But, you know, in the meantime, he kind of was enjoying himself, but he was at the point where he was frustrated because he was doing things he didn't want to do. And so, you know, you need to watch that. You need to watch, and that goes both sexes. You can see it both ways. So be careful of that thing. All right, neglect by caregivers. That is something that you find. Now, with the case with Millie, this was, and this I have run into many, many times. Millie had had a stroke. She was in need of a caregiver in order to go home. Her son had a couple felonies in the past. He had actually been arrested one time for physically abusing her. However, according to the family, he was better, he was doing great. So, because they didn't want to pay for a caregiver, they wanted to keep mom at home, they brought George in to be the caregiver. It was cheap. He didn't have a job. Why not, take care of two things at one time? Mom gets a caregiver, George has a home, that's perfect, right? Well, never, it's never perfect. It really isn't. If you have a relative or friend that has a bad past, that has been an alcoholic or a drug abuser, and they could be a little bit better, but you don't know for sure, you're not doing background checks, and you invite him in to save money, to care for your elderly person, the chances are they're going to end up abusing that person. I can tell you. I have had to remove many sons, cousins, nephews from homes because they're abusing their elderly person. In this case, he just kind of snapped and was also taking advantage of all her money. But it's several times. And to get them out of the home at that point in time, because they're there without a lease, they're not paying rent, you have to go through the 30-day eviction process. So they actually have a legal right to stay in the home for 30 days no matter what. So you have to take mom or somebody else out. You have to get them out. So that's one of my problems I run into, and I've had it more than once. All I gotta say, if you have a nephew and you think they're gonna take good care of mom, but they've had a drug issue in the past, don't go there. That's not gonna work, okay? It pays to get good help, so don't do that. Neglect comes in many ways. No food. This is what's in the refrigerator of an older person. Nothing, basically. How were they being fed? What was happening? Sometimes you see where they're not given their medications. We can also go back to where the medications are being used by the caregiver instead of them, or the daughter or the son. Sometimes their medications are being sold on the street. So you have to be careful with neglect. You look for underweight, loss of weight, physical problems, bed sores, that's a huge issue. Diaper changing, you frequently go into a home and you can tell that somebody hasn't had their diaper changed in all day, or hasn't been showered, or clothes aren't clean, or the house is a complete disaster. I don't mean messy. Messy is normal. I think we all have our little messes. I mean dog feces on the sofa, all right? I mean dirt piles in every corner. I mean dirty dishes in the sink that have been there for a week or more. Bugs crawling out of the cabinets. Bugs on the bed where the person is sleeping. This is filth, and this is neglect, okay? And you do see it often, unfortunately. Financial exploitation. That's probably one of the reasons I get called in frequently is financial exploitation. People have a tendency to find a vulnerable person, befriend them, and then find ways to get at their money. It's not unusual for a neighbor to all of a sudden be at the door often, a handyman, a granddaughter. They find that the elderly person is their own personal ATM machine. And they use it until the money's gone. And then, of course, they dump the person. But it goes on. Power of attorney, and I'm sure the attorneys will go on that, but I've had more than one call from a group home, assisted living, where a relative or a friend has brought in a notary with power of attorney and wants the person to sign. right then and there. And then they can go in and get into the bank accounts and all that stuff. It's really, financial abuse is a real problem. So guard your finances safely, get to know your bankers, let them know what you want and what you don't want, because they have the ability to call and get help. Let your children know, if you trust your children, get them on your bank account so somebody lets them know, or they can look at your bank account and say, oh, mom's going to the ATM frequently. What's going on? You know, you can call. Just to remind you, one of our busiest times a year as a guardian is after the first of the year. And you know why? Because family members come and visit once a year, and it's at the holidays. And they go, oh my gosh, I didn't know it was this bad. And then they call. If you have a friend, a relative that is elderly and a little vulnerable, call often. Go visit often. Or have a friend visit often. Because it's very easy for an exploiter to get into their lives. They're lonely, they're unsure of themselves, things aren't the way they used to be, and they can come in and easily convince them to go to the bank, the ATM. They'll help them write a check. All you have to do is sign on the signature line and I'll take care of everything. It happens a lot. Or give me the credit card. I'll be happy to help you. This is, I don't know if you can see it from there, but this is the bank statement from that Millie's son has. Her income was significant. Not significant, but a little over $2,000 a month. She had no bills to speak of. She has a small mortgage, very small, like a couple $100s, so she should have been able to live fine on that. If you can see it or in your handout, there are lots of withdrawals at an ATM, and it's Boulder Station or Sunset Station. And he's going frequently. He's overdrafting the account, so she's paying overdraft fees. He's not paying the utilities. He's not paying the mortgage. He's not doing any of these things. So, you know, it's sad that our children would do that to us. I always say, be really nice to your children. You're going to want them to be there for you. Don't make them angry. But if you have children or relatives that do have issues, just be aware. I mean, I'm not saying don't love them, don't care for them. I'm just saying just be cautious. Don't get yourself or don't let other people get into a situation where somebody else has to come in and kind of fix it. Or that your friend or relative gets down to no money at all and then ends up that's not a good situation. Healthcare fraud. I don't deal with that a lot because usually once I'm in, we're very cautious about that. But you do have issues we'll go back to the drugs, where prescriptions are being refilled and refilled. You do have instances where doctors will say, this person needs this procedure. Okay, when you're 90 years old, you don't necessarily need all kinds of surgeries to fix things that aren't going to be of a benefit. You don't want to be in the operating room. So you can say no to these things. So be cautious, watch your bills. Some doctors double bill, a lot of times it's a mistake, but you need to call. They don't check. And be careful of that. Medicare abuse is pretty rampant, so guard your Medicare card, that sort of thing. All right. I'm not going to take questions right now because we have two other speakers where I think we're waiting till the end of all of our time. But we're more than happy to take questions, and I'll be here afterwards to listen to anybody if they have questions, okay?
My name is J.P. Rahman. I'm from the Clark County District Attorney's Office. I want to give you a brief overview of how things get to my level before we talk about certain things. So basically, if a person like Linda sees some kind of abuse, even if she doesn't have all the answers, she might report it to Elder Protective Services, or she might report it to the police. Just like the example with Millie, she reported it to the police, maybe even Elder Protective Services as well. No. That's 100% fine. And once the police or Elder Protective Services have investigated and they believe they have evidence that a crime has been committed and they know who committed the crime, they might submit a case to my office. Now, my office has recently created an elder abuse unit. We started in November of 2015, so we've been running for about 9 months at this point. It's been the huge challenge that I thought it would be, but it's a wonderful challenge to have. I have another deputy who works with me. We don't solely do elder abuse. We also do major crimes, many hundreds of thousands, $1 million thefts, and public corruption cases. So we take all the elder abuse, and when I say that, just like Linda said, we take physical abuse, we take financial, we take neglect, we take abandonment, we take isolation, all of those things. We don't take the sexual. I have a shared experience. We don't see too many of those type of cases where it's care home sexual, and they're very difficult cases to prove. So I've seen one submission on that. I haven't seen anything that was rising to the level where we could actually prosecute. But that's basically how the case comes to us. And then when we get a case, we look at it, we charge it. If we see there's crimes there, we charge those crimes. We arrest and get somebody into court. And then we see if they want to plead guilty. If they don't, then we have to bring them to trial. And that's the process. Ultimately, what happens to them is largely in the hands of the judges that you all elect. So clearly, if you see something of note where it was a crime that matters to you and you see a judge do something in that crime that you don't particularly care for, you're the ones who have the power to put them in and out of office. So feel free to exercise that power. Obviously, elderly and vulnerable people, and besides having an elder abuse unit, I also deal with vulnerable people. People who are above the age of 18 who suffer from a mental or physical deficit which impairs their daily living in a significant way. So I have cases where maybe we have somebody who is 45 years old and has severe schizophrenia. That kind of case would also come to me. But these type of people are the kinds of people who really need others to help identify and report abuse, because they're not in the best position to be self-identifying abuse, or because of their disability, whatever ailment they're suffering from, they may not come off as particularly credible. Obviously, there was a slogan that came up by Homeland Security to see something, say something. I think it applies perfectly within the context of elder abuse and vulnerable person abuse. If you see something, the burden is really on you to say something about it. The person who's being abused, neglected, financially exploited, isolated, probably can't say something for themselves. People who should say something, guardians, social workers, medical professionals, supportive services, this could be home health care aides, personal care assistants, attorneys, friends and family, and anybody who suspects exploitation. It could be neighbors, it could be complete strangers, it could be the mailman, it could be anybody. The ones with asterisks are the mandatory reporters. So obviously, people who have that duty have a legal obligation to say something. Anybody who doesn't have that legal obligation still should say something because it's the right thing to do. At least once something is said, an investigation can take place. And then there's 2 agencies in our state who take the reports. For vulnerable people, those reports should come directly to the police. We have, like I said, Elder Protective Services, but they are state mandated to deal with only elderly people. If there's a report on that 45-year-old person with severe schizophrenia, they're not going to be able to do anything about that. That should go directly to the police. For elderly people, the statute says you can report to Elder Protective Services or you can report to the police. If you live in Henderson, that's going to be the Henderson Police Department. North Las Vegas Police Department. City of Las Vegas and unincorporated Clark County, that's going to be the Las Vegas Metropolitan Police Department. Obviously, if you were calling 911 or 311, they'll be able to figure out where it should go. It's not like you have to look up these particular departments. So possible exploiters, and I've been doing this even though the unit's only been created since November. I've been receiving these kind of cases for the last 4 years because some of them involve very high dollar amounts, and those always would come my way anyway. Potential exploiters could be long-lost claimed family members. They seem to come out of the woodwork. Close family, especially estranged siblings, children with drug or alcohol problems, just like Linda said. Friends become exploiters, unfortunately. Contractors, maintenance workers. There's a lot of contractors and maintenance workers out there who will exploit people who they think they can get one over on. Home health care and PCA. Guardians. People from church, that's called affinity fraud. People tend to trust people more if they have a shared interest. If you go to the same congregation as somebody, well, there's an air of credibility because you see them there, know them, believe they're God-fearing, they wouldn't exploit you. That's called affinity fraud. Neighbors, and even attorneys. Lottery scammers, so those are all people who are sort of connected. Now we're talking about strangers. Lottery scammers, people who call up people and say, hey, you won a lottery, which you never, by the way, entered, and there's this millions of dollars in prize, all you have to do is pay the taxes on it. This happens all the time, and people unfortunately fall for it. There are criminals who target seniors. They're not physically able to defend themselves as easily. They may be lonely because a spouse or relatives have passed on, or they may be suffering from mental deficits which allow them to trust somebody when they should be skeptical. Former co-workers can even be somebody who just comes out and says, oh, I know that person has money. Let me get involved in their lives. Let me shut down all their other relationships and let me then take the money. So one of the examples, and I call this Doesn't Add Up. Isn't Clip Art great? This was my first choice. The second choice probably would have been Casey Kasem. So, scenario number one, an elderly man moves into the apartment next door to you. When you try to spark up conversation with him, he seems out of it. He's a poor historian. So what that means is when you ask him about his family, his kids, his wife, he has troubles with names and dates. You often see two young women coming by his apartment picking him up. And they don't appear to be dressed like home health care workers or anybody who would really be providing services. So this is an actual case that I had. These two ladies were exploiting this older gentleman. What happened is he was an 84-year-old man. He resided in California. His wife passed away a few years before this incident, and he was living alone. His mind started to go. He was suffering from Alzheimer's dementia. These two girls identify him as somebody who can be exploited because of his circumstances. They convince him to move out of his house. He had a condo which he sold, or it was a townhouse, and they move him to Las Vegas. And they put him up in a weekly apartment that's kind of adjacent to the Strip. In this case, these girls would come by to his place, pick him up, usually by way of taxi cab, and bring him to ATMs and banks for the sole purpose of taking his money. This surveillance still is from one of those cab rides. One of the advantages over cabs that Uber doesn't have is cabs have surveillance. Ubers don't necessarily have surveillance. So we are able to obtain some surveillance from this incident. In this particular situation, when the video would play, you would see him sort of feebly handling the ATM card to the woman. She's doing all the transactions there. The woman in the back is asking for the PIN number, etc. For some reason, this cab driver did nothing about it. Here's another surveillance still. This has front and interior cameras. So you can see they arrived at a bank because that's clearly an ATM kiosk. And inside is the elder gentleman. And then we had other surveillance footage. This is a scenario where one of the girls simply left without him having his ATM card, and that's her obviously retrieving cash money from his accounts. So obviously, when you look at things, putting aside the whole what we see in the cab, there are suspicious activities that are going on here. If you were this person's neighbor, you should probably say something. So if I were the neighbor, I would call Elder Protective Services, I'd tell them what I see going on, And perhaps if I'm able to have a dialogue with this gentleman, I'd ask him a few more questions. Because what happened in this case is the bank asked him a couple of questions on one of those occasions. On his first visit to the bank, it was a large withdrawal, 5 figures. And the teller asked him what the money was going to be used on. He said he was going to purchase an RV. On the second visit, the same teller saw him and said, "What happened to the RV?" And he said, "I don't know about an RV." So that's a huge red flag. If asked who those girls were, so if anybody had asked him, he would have told you, "I'm dating one of these girls, I'm supposed to marry her." The younger one was 20. That doesn't make any sense. He would have said that he is taken out by them a lot and he pays for everything that they want to do. And he didn't remember the name of his wife, who he was married to for 40 years, or any of his children. Turns out he was living in California. Obviously his wife had passed. His children were all living in Washington State. Another good question would be to ask him where he banks. That's helpful to the police when it comes to trying to unravel this. So there's good small talk kind of questions that could have been asked of this gentleman, which would have gotten to the bottom of this quickly. In the second example, this is a very interesting example. No case came out of it. It eats at me because it's so ridiculous. Elderly man was seen loitering for a while at the main entrance of the Tropicana. Security asked him what he was doing, and they made small talk with him. He said he was waiting for his wife and sister to pick him up. And when he was asked how long he was waiting there, he said, "I've been here about 15 minutes. Video surveillance revealed he'd been there for several hours. Security asked him if his wife or sister's phone number, whether he had it in his phone or he had it on him. He said he did not. They asked him, "Well, how do you know they're coming in 15 minutes? He said, "I've been communicating with them telepathically." So they call paramedics for some kind of mental health assistance. So, unfortunately, what happened in this case, I didn't put it in there. I'd like to tell you about it, and this is why it eats at me. So paramedics showed up, and they had the same conversation with this gentleman as security did. And the paramedics were so stupid that they believed that telepathic communication is a religious preference, and they simply left. So, that is frustrating. So what can we learn from this circumstance? People can seem like they're in their right frame of mind until you really start to ask more than how's the weather, what's going on. There's common small talk, and you can take it a little bit further. You don't have to get into somebody's life story, but a few non-probing, everybody's okay with those kind of questions. That's pretty much all security did. Hey, how long you been here? Where's your family? You know, they've seen a guy loitering for a couple hours. They want to know something. Sometimes it takes hard evidence to get to the bottom of it. Luckily, this is a casino. They have wonderful surveillance. If they just walked up to the guy and he said he's been here for 15 minutes, maybe they would take his word for it, and that's the end of the story. Maybe somebody else said, "No, I've seen him here. He's been there for like an hour." Chances are security, even if they didn't have surveillance, is pretty good. Somebody would have been, that guy has just been standing there. They did the right thing, the Tropicana did, calling for the medical assessment. But obviously, medical assessment botched the case. And obviously, you guys see the news, you read the paper, we have so many elderly and vulnerable people who just go missing. And unfortunately, there's a measurable percentage of them who end up dead. There was a gentleman just 2 weeks ago, was reported missing, found dead in a park. So it's important that if you see somebody who's a little bit out of place, you might want to ask a few questions and maybe probe a little bit deeper to see if they're in their right mental state. How's the weather is not going to cut it. The third example, calling it "Why Are You Here?" In this case, a mother is transported to a behavioral health care center, so say like a Monte Vista. It's a residential inpatient. She has Alzheimer's dementia. Some circumstances necessitate her to be in this facility. Family and others pay visits. Then she gets a visitor from alleged grandson. Now I want you to think about this for a minute. Is there any way a facility is going to know whether that person is actually her grandson? No, there's absolutely no way. There's no paternity test. Chances are grandson does not share the same last name as the patient. It's a very difficult situation. He visits several times. His belongings are searched. Often these facilities make sure that contraband and weapons are not brought in the facility. And every time he comes in, he has power of attorney paperwork. So, because and I actually know this because I've been to Monte Vista, and they have supervised visitation in a videotaped common area room. So they can see what's going on and they can record it. And 90% of the time, it's not how are you doing, you know, we're doing this at our house. It's, you need to sign this power of attorney, I need to get this money. That's not the way the visit should go. It should be more focused on the person that they're trying to communicate with, see about their well-being, kind of bring their mood up. That's what visitors are for, to help the person who's dealing with a hard situation, not to try to take their finances. And obviously the grandson, if he has a proper notary form, he's going to see that that power of attorney needs the notary. So he's going to start bugging the staff if he does get that signature as to, do you have a notary on staff? I need to get this signed. So obviously that's a red flag. He's not caring about the well-being of the patient. He's caring about himself and the finances. A person under medical care in a hospital is not legally capable of providing power of attorney, not unless it has a physician's affidavit. So, and that's in the law, that's in the statute. It's a brilliant law. There are many hurdles that have to be overcome if somebody's to give that out. But then there's another problem with that. So, let's say that suspect gets power of attorney from patient. And maybe he walks out of there without it getting notarized, because frankly, if the facility allowed that, that facility should be sued as the notary should be. But let's say he leaves with a signature. Well, the bank that he brings that power of attorney to isn't going to know that this person was under medical care. There's no way they could know that. It's a very difficult situation. Or, let's say he's stymied. Well, he might just forge her signature and get a shady notary to notarize that document and be on his way. So it's a troubling circumstance. So what should probably occur in this case? And I told Monte Vista, maybe you should do this. You're not going to make any friends doing this, but if somebody came in with that form and those circumstances present themselves, maybe you should pull out a big, giant void stamp. Stamp that document. They might have some physical altercations if they did that, so it's probably bad advice. But legally, it would be sound. Obviously, if somebody was doing that, constantly pestering somebody you know, your mom, about a power of attorney, that should be reported to the police or EPS. Now, if that actually did occur, obviously anything that was brought under this fraudulent POA, you could try to legally undo it. But chances are, if the money has been transferred and spent, it's going to be hard to recover. If it's a family member who did it, who's constantly pestering that relative, you may want to try getting a restraining order. And obviously, if you know that somebody like this may come out of the woodwork for your friend, your mom, etc., you may want to alert the staff at the medical facility so that when they do come by, if they do, they can be in a raised state of alert. So, information that really helps the police. Oh, sorry. Information that really helps the police and EPS investigate. They're going to want to know about, when financial cases come, where is the money? So, where the person banks, if you have it. If it's prepaid credit cards, what banking institution was that? Sometimes people use PayPal. Brokerage, IRAs, CDs. Was it Charles Schwab? Was it Ameritrade? If there's a life insurance company at stake, that's important information as well. Real estate, you don't have to go to the assessor and find out the parcel number, but simply an address would help. If it's a vehicle that was at stake, was it a Buick? Maybe it was a 2006 Buick Regal, that'd be important. License plate number if you know it. And as much information as you can possibly gather about the suspect. Their name, if you know their family, you probably know their date of birth, social, how long they've had their accounts, where they bank. Do they bank at Wells Fargo? It might be important for the police if money is transferred from the victim to the suspect to get his Wells Fargo account and see if it went in there. Does he gamble at the cannery? Maybe we should get cannery records to see, oh, we got all this money coming out from victim's bank account, and lo and behold, he gambled $1,200 that day. That would be pretty good proof. What they can do once they have that information, subpoena bank records, they can get signature cards if people have added themselves as payment on death beneficiaries. They can find out how that all transpired, who signed on these accounts, who was present, what IDs were shown. And if it happens close enough to the incident, maybe they can get surveillance from that bank. Maybe we can get that beautiful surveillance that I showed you in example 1, where we have the suspect in the taxi pulling stuff from the ATMs, or her at the ATM pulling out the money. So these things are very helpful. This is what a few common, easy to ask questions might yield. And obviously my final thoughts regarding all of this goes back to these people can't speak for themselves. You really need to pick up for them. Be it you're their provider, you're their friend, you're their neighbor, or they're your family member. You really have to say something, because if you don't, nobody might. And if nobody might, people who do this might get away with it. If you're a mandatory reporter or a financial institution, you might be sued. So there's extra incentive to report it, because if you don't, you could be financially liable. And I have my email address. I know you all have printouts. If you have any questions, feel free to email me.
Thank you. I think, let me get my bearings on our time, because we're done at 1, is that right? Someone happily shouted yes, like they want to make sure this was done at 1. Well, okay, so I just want to make sure we have enough time for questions and so forth. So what I'm going to do is I may slightly skip through the screens, and I just want to echo, a story has come to my mind as I'm sitting here, is that there's a story about a person who fell into a river, and they were drowning, and they started going down the river, and this guy saw him, and he jumped in and saves him and pulled him out. And just as he pulls him out, he looked out, there's 2 people in the river. And then so he jumped in, and he's kind of athletic, and he was able to save both people, and just as he got him out, then there was 3 people in the river. And at a certain point, you got to go upstream and find out who's throwing them in the river. You know? I mean, you can only save so many people. And that's what thought just came to my mind today, that it applies, I think, to this, because, you know, here you have Linda, who deals with it every day. You've got Jay, who has to go after people. And maybe my part is talking to people about, you've got to get this command and control in place ahead of time. That's what's going to stop some of this stuff from happening. And I would add one other tricky one to all of this. You think about these exploiters and, you know, young women who might exploit older men. But another angle on this is when they actually get married. If they convince them to get married, then it's really difficult, because now there's presumptions in the law about community property. We've had a couple of cases in our office recently where the new spouse of a little bit elderly gentleman is extremely aggressive about going after changing plans and changing things. And so I'm going to talk about that just a little bit. And I also want to echo what Linda and Jay are talking about. When a POA, a power of attorney, is executed in a facility, you know there's a presumption that thing's void. Like he said, they should just get a stamp. Do you know we see it all the time? Constantly. People come in and they say, even well-meaning people, they come in and say, I got this POA. I say, is there any estate planning documents in place? And they say, well, not really, but last week, fortunately, mom's losing her mind, but I was able to go in and I got a POA executed. Okay, now you hope the person that comes in is a nice person, because sometimes I look at my clients and I think you're the stinker. I mean, usually I think my clients are good, and then every once in a while I find out I'm on the wrong side of the gunfight. And so I have to try to right that ship a little bit. Also, does anyone know here, how effective are powers of attorney really? Can you sell a home with a power of attorney? Nope, it's not gonna happen. Most banks don't take a power of attorney. And so it's interesting because it is only, I would add another red flag to me is people that come into a facility and they want a power of attorney. It just seems kind of flimsy. If the person's in a facility, it seems like we ought to be, and again, not to promote myself, but it kind of seems like, where's the attorney? I mean, are we going to talk, if there's assets, are we maybe going to talk about a guardianship or something like that? And so people that just come in with a form of a power of attorney somewhere, it's kind of way too little, too late, and it's just a flag. That in and of itself to me is a flag that it's late planning. So we'll skip through a couple of these first ones here. And we know, I think Jay's addressed this, there's a fair number of people that are exploited, and interestingly, our research showed that it was oftentimes family members and acquaintances. That's interesting. So we all need to look real close at our family, I guess. Be even more suspicious of them. Let me keep going up here just a little bit. So get your documents in order. How many of you have heard someone say, well, I don't think we need to talk to an attorney yet or get that done? They get people that put stuff off. And it's interesting because you can discount what I'm saying because I'm a lawyer that, I'm a for-profit person. So if you want, you don't have to believe anything I'm saying, but I'm telling you, people need to get in and get their stuff taken care of and think about who's going to be. Another thing I would point out that I think is a red flag is joint accounts. So if you don't get along, how many of you have seen people who get put on jointly on an account with someone? I mean, it's rampant. It's happening all the time. So did you know that if my mother puts me on a joint account, and Jay can correct me on this, but there's probably some constructive trust argument or something, but basically, if my mom puts me on a joint account, and I hate my brothers and sisters, and I'm gonna help mom with the money, so I need to get it in my accounts where it's easier, is that illegal if I took money out of a joint account? No. I mean, maybe there's a situation where the facts might show that, but basically you've made a gift, okay? So putting people on accounts, which happens all the time, to me is a recipe for disaster. Another one I would throw out in relation to that is, what if the kid, who's these bad people that Jay and Linda pointed out that have drug and alcohol problems, do you think they might have a bankruptcy? Yeah, do you think they maybe have had divorces and things like that, multiple problems in their life? Well, when they're on mom and dad's accounts, a lot of times their creditors then attach to those accounts. And also, related to this is, I'm going to help mom and dad by going on title. Mom, dad, don't you think you ought to put me on title to that house? Because, we don't like to talk about it, but what if you died? Well, okay, I guess I'll put them on jointly. Well, if mom and dad's house is paid for, but I have creditors, then my creditors, if they find out about that, they can easily put a lien on the house. And so I think this kind of ad hoc, like after the fact, estate planning is a huge sign. It's just of things going wrong. So let's skip ahead here. How do we protect ourselves? So we've got health, financial, and the legal side of it, and we'll go through this here. Advanced directives. We have durable power of attorney, living will. Some of you may have heard of this PULST thing that's kind of new in Nevada. It's a kind of a physician's orders where they direct what can be done if somebody's really sick. But there's a lot of overlap between these things. And people mistake the names like crazy. So they come in and say, I need a DNR. I need to get that done, Michelson. And then I start talking to them. I say, do you have a terminal illness? Well, no, but I don't want to be resuscitated. Well, you can't do a DNR technically in Nevada unless you have a physician's signature and there's an illness. But you can do a living will that just says, hey, if I ever get in that situation, I don't want to be on machines and things like that. So healthcare power of attorney, where you designate someone that's going to make medical decisions for you. Did you know recently I got called into a facility because they were worried they did what Jay wants them to do. And they said this guy was showing up and kind of bothering their client that was in his 90s and acted like he was getting a lot of money and everything. So I tried to track the guy down, and do you know where I found him? He was in jail. because, so the fiduciary that had taken over my client's trust and everything was a sovereign citizen, it turns out. You guys know what that is? Or they think they're a country themselves.
Oh, I see.
And he was a neighbor in this guy's apartment, and he said, so the neighbor, the sovereign citizen says, I don't pay taxes, I don't recognize the laws in the United States, and that's who my client decided to make his trustee. You know, I don't know what, obviously, he couldn't think clearly. And so this guy had a moped that he drove around. He got pulled over by the police, and because he's not subject to their authority, he decided to have a fight with them, and he ended up in jail. But he had all of our clients' credit cards and checkbooks and everything like that, and then we had to go through a process to get it out. And so again, advanced planning. The gentleman had a trust, but he waited way too long. His trustees had long since died, and he didn't update it. So we'll come back in the question time. If you have any questions on durable, power of attorney, living will, DNR, pulse, there is a little bit of overlap. It's a little confusing, but the bottom line is there's documents that you can put in place about what kind of care you want to receive, and it's not that hard to do. And there's sometimes you can get free forms and stuff like that, but it'll avoid a lot of family fights and confusion. And we'll go through some of this here. I'm going to move through this and give us some more question and answer time. Well, DNR. And obviously you've got this in your materials here. I want to talk a little bit about whoa, we are just about out of time. When do I need to end? Because I've got the gift of gab. I can just go. Okay. Okay. Well, all right. I'll try to throw in a couple of shocking stories just to keep us awake. So I just want to talk a little bit about a will and a trust. So a will, a lot of people ask this question, what's the difference between a will and a trust? A will does not avoid probate. It doesn't avoid guardianship, so we need to remember that. But it does do a little bit. It does designate who you want to receive what you have. And so if you don't do that, it's just going to go automatically to your wife or your kids. And I guess if you hate your kids, you might want to name someone else. Or a common one that we see is if you're not married and you just have a boyfriend or a girlfriend the senior wants to leave the money to, then they would do that with a will. And also a trust, I just want to hit a couple points on a trust. Many people say to me, well, this person doesn't need a trust. Even when I'm getting a referral, because you know how I'm the dangerous attorney, they'll say, this person doesn't need a trust. They need just a will or whatever. And I always say, well, hold on just a second. Don't we associate a trust as being with someone who has a lot of money, right? But in some cases, a trust can be really helpful for someone that even has maybe a more modest amount of money and a house. So for example, if mom has a home that's paid for, let's just say it's like the family home. If she doesn't do a trust, doesn't put it in a trust, but she puts it into joint tenancy with me, because she's just going to do a will, right? In this example, what would happen if mom loses capacity, but we needed to sell the house? I can't do it, because remember joint tenants with right of survivorship, it only works if she's, with all love and respect, if she's passed away. So if she or grandpa are dead, then I get the house and I can do what I want with it. But if they're just incapacitated and all she did is a will, well, now I got to go get a guardianship to sell that house, and that's going to cost thousands of dollars and take a bunch of time, and my sister hates me and she's going to object to it, and it's just going to be, plus the fact that if you put me on title to the house, like we said, now all my creditors, my IRS taxes I haven't paid, they attach onto the house. So in some cases, when there's a house involved, that's a kind of a key point. Grandpa maybe doesn't have that much money. He's down to his last 20 or 30,000 in the bank, but he has a house. I still might do a kind of a simple trust just so we can sell it if we have to, if it comes to that. And I know for those of you professionals here, there's an issue of a house being an exempt asset for Medicaid, so that's like another consideration, but at least we have the authority without the guardianship to do that. So don't be too quick to foreclose the idea of a simple trust. It actually can save money by not doing guardianship and probate. I just want to remind everyone, do you know that if a person remarries, so they do their estate plan, I had a case where I did not help this gentleman, he did it himself, he had a form, and he did a will, and he left everything to his daughter. And that's who he loved, it was his only child, and then she had a couple cute little kids, and he told his daughter, okay, I took some steps, everything's going to you, I just want you to know. Then, unbeknownst to anyone, supposedly, remember, I can't always tell if my client's the good one or the bad one, but supposedly, no one knew this, he flew to another country and got married. And then he suddenly died unexpectedly when he came back home. So now he has a wife, and what would happen to that estate? I'm just going to quiz you guys. If we have a will that leaves the estate to the daughter and his kids that he really loved, but he got married literally like 3 months before he died, all this happened very quickly. Who gets all the property? Yeah, there is a statute that says that there's a presumption that if you don't go back, so if you do your plan and then you remarry, and you don't go back and say, okay, I love my new wife, but we're kind of new here, and so I'm going to leave I mean to not include her in this plan. If you don't patch your will or your trust, it's presumed the thing is revoked. Wow. And then the argument becomes, is she going to get 50% or 100%? If depending on the titling, if it's going to be community property or not. But she's at least getting 50%, which may be good. Maybe the wife was the good person in all this. The problem is we don't really know, because the guy was doing kind of, on the cheap, here's a form, that kind of estate planning. Interestingly, in that case, on the form that he got, it said, who's your beneficiary? And he listed his friend that he wanted to be the executor. And then it said, who's your executor? And he listed his daughter. So that was another problem. He flipped that and gave everything to his friend anyway, but we were able to fix that. So I think I'm just gonna bring that to a close with just saying, please encourage, and I actually did an article on this one time, that don't we as healthcare professionals, we love to help senior people as much as we can, except we're slightly scared of lawyers. We don't want to give them any legal, we don't want to go into legal, we don't want to give them that. And I think if there's a way at your different facilities, you don't even have to use me, you can use somebody else, but if you could possibly do a little more to allow access to legal help and legal professionals, we might be able to intervene in the river ahead of time before we're running into these girls from California taking all their money. So, I'll leave it at that.
Do we have any questions for Linda, Jay, or John?
What happened to those young ladies?
The younger one who he was supposedly going to marry, she's still in warrant. The older one is in prison right now.
You didn't talk about guardianship, but is it still true that you need somebody in state to be a guardian?
No, that law changed last year about this time. You don't need an in-state guardian. You can be anywhere.
I had a question for the district attorney's office. I have a friend that is in that's in deep trouble with elder abuse. She has caregivers that are taking wonderful care of her, but they don't have money. The original agreement was the granddaughter was going to pay them $400 a month, and then they got free rent to live in the house, because the house was paid for, the car was paid for, and they would take care of my friend. Well, the granddaughter all of a sudden just went off the deep end and is a drug addict, and she's using the grandmother, and she got power of attorney from the grandmother. I reported this to Helen at Adult Protective Services, but she and the people, the caregivers, they're telling, calling this Helen too, but nothing is happening. And the latest incident, the granddaughter came in the middle of the night and stole the car out of the garage. So now that's their only means of transportation to take the elder to her. She has cancer and she has a very bad dementia, so she doesn't know now, as it's gotten worse and worse and worse, the people would be capable of taking care of the money and handling and everything, but how do we get this away from the granddaughter?
Right. It sounds like you were the friend who did see something and said something. You said something to Elder Protective Services, and the response has been not expected. I would take your concerns to the police at this point, because it has escalated, it's only getting worse, and there's no end in sight. So I would definitely contact the police.
So the caregiver, she called the police about the car being stolen. She also, so the granddaughter has stolen all the mother's drove everything. It's a big, long fiasco. And they've actually, the caregivers have reported this to the police department, and they've called us Helen and told her the case numbers and everything. But, they're running out of money. They need to buy like Depends, which is a big expense for the mother. That house is immaculate when I go there. They keep the house, they're really great people, but it's just, somebody needs to get that money away from the granddaughter.
Sure. I think that at this point she's going to need some legal intervention besides obviously trying to investigate and punish the granddaughter as an exploiter. I think that there are services out there. If she has any kind of money, there are people like John who can help. If she's indigent or wants a few free questions, there are sources like Legal Aid, Southern Nevada Senior Law Project. They do provide services in circumstances like that.
So the caregiver should contact like the aunt.
Yeah.
Yeah, but they can't afford to pay the lawyer. They don't have, the mother, she, on top of everything. On top of everything, her granddaughter stole what money she had left. What money she did have was all lost in time scheme. So all she has is, I know she gets a little over 2,000 on Social Security, and her husband, I think, gave her an annuity, which comes due every year.
But the granddaughter is a trustee, is that right? Because you might, again, we have to talk more about it, but a couple of ideas, you might be able to open a guardianship or a trust litigation matter and try to sue the trustee, because she has high fiduciary duties that she's breaching. And
Because see, I'm not a relative.
yeah, we have to see if there's a relative or someone that can, a successor trustee maybe. That's tough, but there might be some things. You got the criminal side and maybe a little civil things. It could be done, but like you say, there's a lot of factors there.
I actually have a question for Jay and Miss Linda, possibly, but it also might go to you as well, Michelson. First of all, I'm one of the social workers here, and I love lawyers. All of my clients get referred to them. But I have a case right now where the will is actually complicating an abuse case, where there is clear evidence of neglect for a patient who is demented. Incidentally, the abuser is also demented. And prior to all of the dementia happening, a will was set up that granted the power to each other in the case that one of them becomes incapacitated. Now, there is an adult child that wants to intervene to protect the parents as best that they can, and the case has already been reported to EPS. But the way that their will is set up, the daughter cannot gain control unless the father, who is incidentally in this case the abuser, becomes incapacitated. And he is not sound in his judgment, but there isn't sufficient evidence to declare him incapacitated. So EPS told the daughter that unless we can declare him incapacitated, he will continue to have the power over the wife, who is the demented patient and being abused by neglect, if that makes sense. So we're just trying to figure out really what the best course of action is for this daughter, because it's very clear that the husband is demented. And even though we can't right now declare him incapacitated, there is clear deficits in his judgment. So I'm trying to advise my client the best way that I can. And she's gone to lawyers and everyone tells her that she doesn't really have any grounds to do anything. So I really don't know at this point on how to advise her on what to do to protect both of her parents, in fact.
So when you say that the will names each other as the...
Correct. So the will says that if the mother becomes incapacitated, then the decisions for the father falls to the daughter. But if the father still maintains his capacity, he can still make the decisions in regards to the care of the mother. And the father is the abuser in this case. He may not know that he's doing it because of his disease, but because of how their will was written, she can't contain or obtain power to make decisions for the mother because the father hasn't been declared incapacitated. But he is the abuser, but because he doesn't know he's doing it, EPS won't intervene.
It seems to me the only cure in my mind's toolbox would be a guardianship, but that would require the physician's certificate that the person needs one and lacks capacity to make those kind of financial or end-of-life decisions. Any of you guys have any other ideas?
Yeah, I have one thought. What's kind of abuse? Is it just neglect, like they're...
There is neglect in the sense that he will leave her unattended for hours on end or sleep in his car, and she cannot, in fact, care for herself, but he refuses to allow the daughter to come into the home because he believes that he can take care of her, but he can't.
Well, I mean, you eventually are going to get into a guardianship, there's no doubt. And the problem is you do need a physician's certificate stating that he is. One thing that you can, and I don't know what their financial is, but if the daughter can somehow get control over any of the money, that's always a good carrot for the other person to start behaving. And I don't know if it's Social Security. You can always become the rep payee. She could go try to become the rep payee if you have especially mom's money, stating that mom doesn't have the capacity. Maybe the rep payee could be given to her.
So the problem with that is we're dealing with a cultural issue in which the male dominates, so it's a patriarchal household, and they are joint accounts. So the father and the mother are on one account based upon their cultural
But I'm not
lessons.
even talking about mom's income. If there's some way the daughter can get control of mom's income, if she's got income, I don't know.
Yes.
She can set up her own bank account for that and then take it. You know, sometimes it helps. If you control the money, sometimes you control the personality a little bit.
I have just a couple thoughts. You sort of challenge us when you say these other attorneys can't figure out. It makes me think, man, this group, this panel can figure this out. But one thought that comes to my mind is when you say it's a will, but then you're also talking about things that sound like a power of attorney, because a will is a death document. Now, some people sometimes they kind of homemake things and kind of blend them together and everything, but if we could see the documents, a probate court has jurisdiction over trust documents and some like things, and I wonder if another way you could attack it without the certificate of incapacity is to say that it's a breach of fiduciary duty. You could hold an evidentiary hearing if the daughter can marshal a little bit of money, and again, we have to see the documents and everything, but it's possible to attack it as a breach of fiduciary duty, not incapacity. And then you could surcharge him, you know, or not that you want to go after him because he's out of it, but you might be able to remove him and get the court to install the next person listed in the document, maybe.